The bikers mocked the old man, tore his flag from its pole, and laughed at his silence. They thought he was powerless, but one phone call changed everything. What happened next shocked the entire street. Let's begin. On the edge of a quiet little town, nestled in a modest house, surrounded by a carefully tended garden, lived Thomas "Tom" Harrison. At 67, Tom seemed every bit the picture of a retired man enjoying a peaceful life. He spent his mornings pruning roses, his afternoons fixing up the shed, and his evenings reading on the porch. The neighbors knew him as the kind man who never hesitated to lend a hand or share his gardening secrets. What they didn't know was the past he'd left behind, a past he hoped he'd never need to revisit. That morning was like any other. The sun cast a golden glow over the garden as Tom trimmed the dead leaves from his rose bushes. The rhythmic snip of his shears was the only sound until the distant growl of engines shattered the peace. The noise grew louder, the roar of motorcycles echoing down the quiet street. Soon, a gang of 6 bikers rolled to a stop right in front of Tom's house. At the head of the group was their leader, a broad-shouldered man with a skull tattoo creeping up his neck. Ray Skull was the kind of person who thrived on making others uncomfortable. "Hey, look at this place," Ray called out, gesturing to Tom's garden. "Looks like something out of a postcard. Maybe we should spice it up a little." His gang laughed, a harsh sound that seemed to swallow the street's usual calm. Tom didn't even glance their way. He kept working, carefully snipping at the roses as though the gang wasn't there. Ray sauntered forward, the heavy stomp of his boots crunching on the gravel. "What's the matter, old man? Too busy with your flowers to greet us?" Tom finally straightened up, turning his steady gaze towards Ray. "You're standing in my garden. I'd appreciate it if you moved along." His voice was calm, but there was a firmness to it that didn't match his unassuming appearance. Ray grinned, amused by the quiet defiance. "Or what? You gonna hit me with a shovel?" He turned to his gang. "Come on, boys. Let's see if these roses are as tough as he is." The gang needed no further encouragement. They began stomping through the flower beds, pulling up bushes and tossing them aside. One biker kicked over a neatly arranged row of tools, scattering them across the driveway. Another grabbed a watering can and dumped its contents onto a patch of freshly planted seeds. Tom didn't yell or rush to stop them. He watched, his expression calm, but his jaw tightening ever so slightly. Then one of the younger bikers, a wiry kid named Bobby, noticed the American flag standing proudly in the middle of the garden. "Hey, Ray, check this out. Grandpa's still playing Patriot." Bobby walked over to the flagpole and grabbed the flag, tugging it free with an exaggerated flourish. "That flag stays where it is," Tom said quietly, his voice cutting through the gang's laughter. Bobby snorted. "Yeah? Says who?" He threw the flag onto the dirt, and the gang erupted into louder laughter. For the first time, Tom's expression shifted. He walked over, bent down, and picked up the flag, carefully brushing the dirt off its surface. His movements were deliberate, his focus entirely on the flag. When he finally looked up, his gaze locked with Ray's. "You've made your point," Tom said evenly. "Now leave." The gang fell silent for a moment, caught off guard by the authority in his voice, but Ray quickly recovered, stepping closer with a mocking grin. "Or what, old man? You gonna call the cops? Let me save you the trouble. They don't care about some garden drama." Tom met Ray's gaze, unblinking. "Last chance." Ray laughed, slapping Bobby on the back. "You hear that? He's giving us a chance. How generous." The gang joined in the laughter, but behind their jeers, some of the neighbors had started peeking out from behind their curtains. Their faces were a mix of fear and pity, but none of them dared step outside. Tom turned and walked back to his porch, the flag still in his hand. He opened the door, stepped inside, and closed it firmly behind him. "Where's he going? To get his knitting needles?" Ray sneered, eliciting another round of laughter. But behind that door, Tom wasn't retreating. He was preparing. The next day, the peace of Tom's street was shattered once more. This time, the gang wasn't content with just stomping around the garden. They returned with more bikes, more people, and a lot more chaos. Buckets of paint, wooden bats, and cans of beer accompanied the gang's swagger as they descended on Tom's house like a traveling circus of destruction. The neighbors peeked nervously from behind their curtains, phones in hand, but no one dared step outside. Ray Skull was clearly enjoying the spectacle. "All right, boys," he called out, waving a beer can in the air. "This place is way too boring. Let's liven it up a bit." He dipped his hand into a bucket of bright red paint and hurled it at the side of Tom's house. The thick splash of color dripped down the pristine white siding. The gang erupted into cheers, laughing like this was the greatest show they'd ever put on. One biker, a wiry guy with a leather vest covered in patches, stomped into the flower beds, yanking up plants like weeds. "What's the point of these anyway? Flowers don't even do anything." "Think we should plant something cooler," another one shouted, laughing as he threw a bush into the air. Nearby, one of them struck a match and tossed it into a neatly arranged flower bed. The flames caught quickly, and the small fire danced in the wind. "That's better," Ray declared, admiring their handiwork. The front door opened, and Tom stepped out onto the porch. He stood tall, his gaze sweeping over the scene without a hint of panic. The neighbors, watching in silence, held their breath. "Oh, look who decided to join the party," Ray said, taking a long swig from his beer. "What's wrong, old man? Not feeling neighborly today?" Tom didn't answer. His calm, unbothered demeanor seemed to irk Ray even more. "Hey, I'm talking to you," Ray barked, grabbing a bat from one of his crew. "How about you show us a little respect, huh?" The gang laughed as Ray approached the porch, dragging the bat along the gravel. The screeching sound was as grating as his grin. "Let me teach you a thing or two about courage," Ray sneered, gripping the bat tighter. Tom stood still, his face unreadable. "You should stop this, before it gets worse." Ray laughed, a deep, mocking sound. "Worse? You think you're gonna scare me with that tough guy act? Face it, old man, you're out of your league." As Ray reached the first step of the porch, one of the younger bikers gave Tom a shove from behind. It wasn't a hard push, but it was enough to make him stumble to his knees. The neighbors gasped audibly, their shock rippling through the street. Ray took another step forward, standing over Tom like a triumphant villain in some low-budget movie. "Not so tough now, are you?" he said, pouring beer over Tom's head as the gang roared with laughter. Tom knelt there for a moment, unmoving, the beer dripping from his hair and onto the porch. Then slowly, he got back to his feet. He didn't wipe his face or brush himself off. He simply stood, his eyes meeting Ray's, with an icy calm that silenced the laughter. "You really should stop," Tom said again, his voice steady and firm. "And why's that?" Ray asked, stepping back with a smirk. "What are you going to do about it?" Tom didn't answer. Instead, he glanced toward the road, his gaze fixed on something in the distance. Ray followed his eyes but saw nothing. Confused, he turned back, only to find Tom staring at him with a faint, knowing smile. The gang's laughter began to falter, and the neighbors exchanged looks, sensing something had shifted. The air grew heavy with tension. Ray waved it off, scoffing. "You're all talk, old man. You can't even stand up for yourself." Tom took a step closer, his expression calm but unreadable. "You'll find out soon enough," he said simply, then turned and walked back into the house, leaving the gang standing in confused silence. The door closed with a quiet finality, and for a moment, no one moved. Ray barked a laugh to break the tension. "He's probably going to call the knitting club for backup." The gang laughed again, but their leader's eyes lingered on the door, a flicker of unease creeping into his expression. Tom stood up slowly, his face calm but focused. He pulled his cell phone from his pocket, its worn case looking oddly out of place in the chaos around him. The gang barely noticed as they continued their jeers and laughter, unaware that the game was about to change. Tom spoke softly into the phone. "They're here. Begin the operation." The words were calm, almost casual, but carried the weight of command. He ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket, turning to glance briefly at Ray and his gang. His expression was unreadable, but something in his eyes made Ray pause mid-laugh. "Who are you calling, Grandpa? The bingo club?" Ray sneered, trying to recover his bravado. Tom didn't answer. Instead, he dusted off his hands and calmly walked to his porch, sitting down on the top step like a man waiting for an overdue appointment. The gang's laughter continued, but now it sounded forced. Even the neighbors, peeking nervously from their windows, felt the shift in the air. And then, the sound of engines filled the street. Not the throaty roar of motorcycles, but the low, steady hum of powerful SUVs. One by one, black vehicles rolled in, their polished exteriors gleaming under the sunlight. The doors swung open simultaneously, and a team of men and women in sharp black uniforms stepped out. Each moved with precision, their expressions serious, their presence commanding. "Federal Organized Crime Task Force," a loud voice boomed. "Hands in the air, you are under arrest." The street froze. For a split second, the gang just stared, trying to process what was happening. Then chaos erupted. Ray turned to run, but he didn't get far. Two agents tackled him to the ground with practiced ease, pinning his arms behind his back as he yelled in frustration. "Get your hands off me," Ray bellowed, thrashing against the agent's grip. The rest of the gang didn't fare much better. One by one, they were disarmed and handcuffed, their protests drowned out by the agent's commands. The neighbors, emboldened by the sight, began to emerge from their homes, phones raised to capture the scene. "Wait, wait!" Ray shouted, "Dad," as they dragged him toward one of the SUVs. "Who are you people? What's going on?" As if in answer, Tom stood up and walked over, his steps steady, his gaze locked on Ray. The gang leader's bravado faltered under Tom's calm stare. "Who the heck are you?" Ray demanded, his voice tinged with panic. Tom stopped a few feet away, hands in his pockets. "Thomas Harrison," he said evenly, "retired director of the Organized Crime Division." His words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Ray's eyes widened, and for the first time, he looked genuinely afraid. "You're kidding!" Tom didn't smile, but his gaze didn't waver. "I don't kid." The neighbors erupted into cheers, clapping and whooping as the agents loaded the gang into the SUVs. A few even shouted words of encouragement toward Tom, who acknowledged them with a small nod. As the last of the bikers were driven away, one of the neighbors approached Tom. "What's going to happen to them now?" "They'll answer for what they've done," Tom replied, his voice steady but kind. "But first, they're going to clean up the mess they made." Under the watchful eyes of the agents, the gang was brought back out to restore the damage. They scrubbed paint off the house, replanted bushes, and swept the driveway while the neighbors watched with satisfaction. When the work was done, Tom walked over to the flag, still lying on the ground where it had been thrown. He picked it up, carefully dusted it off, and placed it back on the pole. As he straightened it, the crowd broke into applause once more. One neighbor called out, "You're a hero, Tom." Tom turned back toward the garden, his lips quirking into a faint smile. "Just an old man who likes his roses," he said. He walked back to his porch, pausing only to glance at the departing SUVs. "Some lessons take longer to learn," he murmured, mostly to himself, "but better late than never." Then, with a calmness that belied the day's chaos, he picked up his garden shears and returned to his roses.